A lioness lay dying in the crushing coils of a massive python. Her pride stood frozen, helpless. No one could save her until one man, a wildlife filmmaker, broke every rule to step into the fight. He pulled her from the jaws of death. But what happened next defied everything we know about wild predators. 1 year later, the lions returned, not for vengeance, but for something far more unbelievable. A thank you. What they did will leave you speechless. The air was thick with moisture as the morning mist drifted low across the waterlogged plains of the Okavango Delta. The tall papyrus reeds swayed gently in the breeze, brushing against the aluminum hull of Elias Thorne's skiff. He leaned against the side of the boat, one hand gripping a steaming enamel mug of black coffee, the other resting on the weathered case of his red camera. The early light wasn't strong yet, just a gentle golden glow threading through the gray, painting the water in muted hues of bronze. Elias had been awake since before dawn, same as every morning this past week. He was a man of quiet rituals, and this, coffee, mist, silence, was sacred. The camera remained idle for now. There were no shots worth taking until the animals stirred. He was after footage of Lechwis today, the antelope that danced like ghosts through the marshes. Their hooves kicked water into sprays that shimmered in slow motion, perfect for his upcoming documentary on endangered species and wetland predators. The Okavango was a high-value ecosystem, and every shot he captured here could mean more than beauty. It could mean conservation grants, environmental sponsorships, or even ad campaigns focused on ecotourism and wildlife rehabilitation. He knew how the system worked. A soft chirp from the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt broke the stillness. It was static. No one on the other end. He turned it off. The nearest rangers were an hour south. Elias had permits for solo filming, rare and hard-earned, but they came with a rule: no interference. Observe, document, stay out of nature's way. He'd signed his name under that clause so many times he could draw it in his sleep. Then, out of the mist it came. A roar, not the kind of roar he'd heard thousands of times on safaris or on the cracked speakers of old editing decks. This one was different, urgent, high-pitched, desperate. It ripped through the air like a wound, echoing between the trees and the rushes coming from somewhere northwest of his position. The boat rocked gently beneath him as he stood, every instinct in his body tensing. Another roar followed, deeper now, more guttural. He reached for his telephoto lens on reflex. Whatever was happening, he would film it. But even before the camera was in hand, his gut told him this wasn't a territorial dispute or a mating challenge. There was panic in that sound. Something was wrong. Elias unhooked the drone from its mount and launched it into the fog. The hum of the rotors rose steadily as he controlled its path toward the sound. The feed on his tablet flickered, blurry treetops, the silver spine of the river, patches of soaked earth, until he saw it. Movement, lots of it. He zoomed in. Lions, 5 of them. 4 were pacing in tight circles, agitated, tails twitching. One, a male, broad-shouldered with a deep gold mane, stood motionless, his head low. Elias adjusted the drone's altitude. That's when he saw the 6th figure, a young lioness trapped. She wasn't being cornered by another predator or threatened by humans. She was being crushed, wrapped tight in the brutal embrace of a massive python. Elias inhaled sharply. The snake was wrapped around her torso and neck, the muscle-bound coils shifting rhythmically. Each pulse seemed to squeeze the life further from her body. Her paws clawed the ground in frantic bursts, back legs kicking, then stilling. The male lion roared again, louder this time, then lunged forward, swiping with his paw at the serpent. But he hesitated, afraid of injuring the lioness. His paw stopped midair, and he backed away, rumbling low in his throat. The others circled, gnashed, then froze. They didn't know what to do. Elias could feel his heart hammering. He'd seen kill scenes before, Dozens. Predators taking down prey was the currency of his work. He'd filmed a mother hyena eating her stillborn cub. He'd captured a leopard dragging a pomquet, warthog through a creek, blood dripping in silent, perfect beads. But this felt wrong. He was about to witness a lion die, not in a hunt, not in a battle, but in a freak, almost impossible attack. Giant pythons rarely went after adult lions. He knew that. Everyone knew that. They fed on smaller game, antelope, warthogs, the occasional calf. This was an outlier, an aberration, something the textbooks hadn't prepared for. He pulled the drone back, guided it to land beside him. The feed died. For a moment, he stood still, fists clenched. "This isn't your fight," he told himself. And yet, his mind went to an image he'd carried for nearly a decade. A baby giraffe, legs splayed awkwardly on a rocky plain, blood matting its neck where a leopard had taken it down. He hadn't intervened then. He'd filmed. The world had applauded his footage. But at night, in the silence of hotel rooms and airport lounges, he still saw those eyes, the pleading, confused ones that had locked with his seconds before the end. No one would know if he interfered this time. There were no other humans around, no rangers, no scientists, just him, 5 lions, and a python. He grabbed his gear bag. Inside was a collapsible aluminum rod, originally designed to hold a mic boom, and 30 feet of climbing rope he used to secure camera rigs. Not exactly tools for wrestling with a reptile the size of a canoe, but it was all he had. He climbed onto the soft, squelching riverbank, the mist coiling around his legs like smoke. Every step brought him closer to the chaos. The lions were real now, not figures on a screen, but beings of breath and muscle and fear. The male lion, the leader, turned as he approached. Elias froze. The lion didn't move. It just watched. Elias held his breath, then took another step. Still no movement. Then another. When he was within 20 feet of the scene, he could hear the labored breathing of the lioness. Her tongue lolled from her mouth, eyes wide, unfocused. The python, now fully coiled, was shifting to reposition. It was tightening. Elias could hear the faint, wet creak of muscle over bone. He moved fast. Sliding behind the snake's tail, he drove the rod beneath one of its coils, pushing with everything he had. Nothing. The muscle was like steel. He tried again, this time throwing his full weight into it. The coil lifted slightly, just enough for the lioness to suck in a gasp of air, a wheezing shudder that rattled her ribs. And that's when it happened. The male lion moved, not in aggression, not to attack Elias, but to help. He bounded forward, thrusting a paw between the coils, just as Elias shifted the rod again. They moved in sync, predator and man, not speaking, not planning, but working toward the same goal. The key words he'd used so often in scripts, animal instinct, predator logic, territorial aggression, meant nothing now. This wasn't that. This was something else, something unspoken. The lion braced, roared again, and tore at the python's midsection with controlled, precise force. Elias pushed with the rod until the snake loosened again. With his free hand, he reached down and pulled the rope tight around a second coil, securing it to a tree root nearby. It bought them seconds, just enough for the lioness to gasp again. She was still alive. Elias fell to his knees, gasping. The lion stood over the lioness, tail flicking. The python writhed in retreat, now coiled loosely, trying to flee. No one followed it. No one moved. Elias rose slowly, blood seeping from a gash on his forearm he hadn't noticed. The lion turned its head toward him. For a moment their eyes met, not in challenge, but in acknowledgement. And then the moment passed. The lion turned back to his pride, to the lioness who was now coughing, her breath returning ragged and shallow. Elias stepped back. He didn't speak. He didn't film. He just walked away. Elias didn't remember walking back to the boat. One moment he was surrounded by lions and the choking stench of crushed papyrus and blood-warmed mud. The next, he was gripping the side of his skiff with trembling fingers, trying to wash the sweat from his face and the ache from his forearm where the python had scraped him. His breathing was uneven. Every inhale shuddered like he was holding back something. Fear, disbelief, or maybe awe. He sat in the boat for a long time. The mist had begun to lift, and sunlight cut shafts through the canopy above. It painted the marsh in copper and gold, like nothing terrible had happened at all. As if that lioness hadn't just nearly died. As if he hadn't just placed his life into the same circle of danger as the apex predators of Africa. His gear bag sat open on the bench beside him. He glanced down at the blood-stained rope, the bent aluminum rod, and the small handheld radio blinking idly. He could report it. He could call the rangers. Say there'd been an attack. Say he'd been a witness. But then what? There were strict protocols in place for wildlife filmmakers. Non-interference was not just a moral guideline. It was a legal line. Step across it, and you risked not only your permits, but your career, especially in protected territories like the Okavango Delta, where the Botswana Department of Wildlife and National Parks worked hard to prevent intervention tourism from undermining ecological balance. He'd broken the rule. Even if it was just him out here, and even if no one had seen it, he had crossed a line. Elias stared at the drone controller lying on the floor of the skiff. He picked it up, opened the video feed. The footage was still there, sharp, clear, undeniable. Lions pacing. A lioness wrapped in the python's deadly grip. And toward the end, a man stepping into the frame. Him, pushing with a rod, pulling at coils. The lion joining him. It was all real. And it had all been recorded. He didn't delete it, but he didn't back it up either. Instead, he powered everything down, sealed the drone into its case, and pulled a blanket over it. The rest of the morning passed in silence. That night, Elias didn't return to the ranger outpost. He anchored the boat in a shallow bend near the reeds and set up his tent. He needed time to think, to process. But sleep did not come. He lay on the cot, staring at the nylon roof of the tent as the jungle choir filled the night. Crickets, frogs, distant hippo grunts. Every rustle made him tense. He kept reliving the moment, the lion's eyes meeting his, the mutual effort, the precision of their combined movement. The lion had understood, had acted, not out of instinct, but with purpose, with intent. At around 3 a.m., Elias gave up trying to sleep. He pulled out his notebook and began writing. Not a report, not a log, something else. He wrote about the lioness, her limbs growing still, the color draining from her eyes. He wrote about the male, how he hadn't attacked even when Elias approached. He wrote, over and over again, one sentence: the lion knew. By sunrise, Elias had packed his things and pushed the skiff downriver. He didn't film that day. He didn't even open his camera case. The footage he had captured yesterday was enough to fill 1,000 documentaries. And yet he had no plans to publish it. The days that followed blurred together. Elias avoided the area where the attack had taken place, choosing instead to explore the southern reaches of the Delta. He filmed buffalo crossings, bull elephants sparring in the morning mist, a cheetah teaching her cubs to stalk. He recorded everything with the mechanical precision that had made him a respected name in the industry. Documentaries aired on National Geographic, streaming deals with platforms known for high-converting wildlife content monetization, and brand collaborations with eco-friendly adventure gear sponsors. But none of it felt real anymore. What he had experienced with the lions was different, raw, unscripted, uncomfortable. He checked his drone footage only once more. The clip stopped a few seconds before the lioness was freed. The battery had died just as Elias threw the last loop of rope over the tree root. There was no proof of the full rescue, just enough to raise questions. He kept the file. Weeks passed. One morning, Elias awoke to the sound of movement outside his tent, not the usual shuffling of small creatures or birds. This was heavy, grounded, 4-footed. He unzipped the flap slowly. 50 yards away, on the edge of the clearing, stood a lion. Not just any lion. Him. The male from the python attack. His mane looked darker now in the morning light, with streaks of ash gray around the edges, like war paint. His eyes were locked onto Elias. Not aggressively, not with threat. Just there. Elias didn't move. The lion stood for a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the bush without a sound. Elias sat down hard on the ground. What was that? A coincidence? A patrol through old territory? Or something more? He tried not to dwell on it. He told himself lions ranged wide, and that one passing through this area didn't mean anything. But the feeling stayed with him. The silence in the lion's movement, the way it had stopped, looked, then gone. 2 days later, Elias found something else. A kill, fresh. A juvenile impala, laid neatly just outside his campsite. Not torn apart. No visible bite marks. No dragging, just placed and untouched. He scanned the area. No scavengers nearby. No vultures overhead. Elias had spent years documenting animal behavior. He knew patterns, rituals, hunting signs. This didn't fit any of them. Lions don't make offerings. But this looked exactly like that. A gesture. His heart pounded as he backed away from the carcass. He didn't touch it. He didn't film it. But that night, sleep finally came. Heavy and dreamless. The next morning, the impala was gone. Bones scattered, some distance away. Flies buzzing lazily in the sun. Elias made notes. He marked the location. He mapped the distance. But none of it gave him the answers he wanted. Instead, he waited. A week passed, then another. And then, one morning, just before dawn, Elias saw them again. The pride, all 5, emerging from the brush, their silhouettes rising like ghosts in the golden hour haze. The lioness, the one who'd nearly died, was with them. She moved slower than the others, her gait slightly off, but she was alive and alert. Her eyes scanned the landscape until they landed on Elias's boat. She stopped. The male joined her. Together they watched. Then the male let out a short huff, soft, almost inaudible, and they turned, fading back into the bush. Elias didn't move for a long time. Eventually he lifted his camera, but he didn't press record. The sun had barely lifted when Elias broke camp the next morning. His hands moved on instinct, folding the tarp, strapping down gear, cinching ropes. But his mind wasn't there. It was still back in that clearing, locked inside the impossible memory of what had just happened. A lion had helped him save another lion. Not tolerated, not allowed. Helped. And now the silence of the delta felt different. Less like peace, more like the moment after a question you don't know how to answer. He pushed off from shore and let the boat drift for a few minutes, motor idling, eyes watching the reeds part as dragonflies skimmed the surface. Somewhere out there, the pride was moving. He didn't know where, but he knew they hadn't gone far. The moment they shared didn't feel finished. Still, he had no plan, no destination, no script, just a restless pull that kept his hands on the tiller and his heart somewhere just beneath his ribs, beating faster than it should. By midday, he found a cove with enough cover to set up a new camp. It wasn't much, just a sliver of land beneath a crooked fig tree, shaded and dry. He set the camera case down unopened, strung a tarp between 2 trunks, gathered deadwood for fire. He kept listening. At first it was just wind and insects, the wet chirp of frogs and the occasional grumble of a hippo. But as the light shifted, so did the air. There was movement in the reeds, a sound like breathing, too heavy for prey, too slow for scavengers. Elias didn't move. He sat on a flat stone and waited. And eventually, just as the heat began to slip from the day, a shape emerged at the edge of the grass. The lion, the same male from the clearing. He stood tall, framed by the fading gold of the sun, his mane ruffled by the wind, his gaze steady. Elias didn't speak, didn't reach for the camera. He only blinked once, slowly, and the lion blinked back. Then, just as silently, he turned and disappeared. Elias sat frozen for what felt like hours, his breath shallow, his limbs heavy. He knew what he'd seen. Not coincidence, not curiosity, recognition. The lion remembered. He had come here not to threaten, not to test, but to show something deeper. Presence. It was almost dark when Elias returned to the fire. He built it higher than usual, more for comfort than heat. The flames danced in the reflection of his metal mug as he poured boiling water over coffee grounds. He pulled out the notebook, not to write the details. He already knew he wouldn't forget. He wrote a question instead. What do you do when the story looks back? That night, sleep came slow. His dreams were scattered, fragments of water and fur, of yellow eyes and strangled breath, of teeth and ropes and silence. He woke once to the sound of something brushing the tarp. A breath, a weight. He didn't move, just lay there, listening. In the morning, there were paw prints in the sand, fresh, large, pressed near the fire, circling the tent. But nothing was taken, nothing destroyed, only visited. Elias washed his face in the river and stared at his reflection in the rippling current. His face looked older than it had a week ago, more lined, but steadier. He had a choice now. He could report the interaction, submit footage, cut together the scene. He knew exactly how to position it, emotional, viral, with the right balance of tension and awe. Sponsors would line up, nature brands, travel insurance companies, eco-conscious camera gear manufacturers. All with keywords ready for monetization. Lion-human encounter, wildlife rescue, man saves lion, predator recognition. But none of it felt right, because to tell the story publicly would be to own it, and it didn't belong to him. He ate a cold breakfast and made a decision. He would stay, not to film, not to interfere, to observe, to understand. That afternoon, he ventured further inland. Quiet steps. Camera left. Behind. The air was thick with heat, and the smell of mud and old leaves clung to everything. He followed the trail the lions had left, a subtle winding path of trampled grass and broken reeds. Then he saw her, the lioness, alive, awake, upright. She limped slightly, but she walked on her own, head high. The scar on her neck was visible even at this distance, pale and raw. Her breathing looked even, her coat healthy. Behind her, a small shape bounded forward, barely more than a shadow. A cub. Elias exhaled slowly. She had survived. And she was still a mother. He stayed there until they vanished into the trees again. Then he turned back toward camp, legs shaking, hands useless at his sides. It had all meant something, every risk, every breath, every second of that impossible moment. They were alive, and they remembered. Back at camp, he pulled the camera out for the first time in days. Not to film the lions. He turned it on himself. Just a few seconds of footage. Man sitting cross-legged by a fire, eyes tired, voice low. I don't know how to explain what happened out here. I just know it changed something in me. He paused, looked down. I used to think the camera was my job, that the story was the goal. But maybe Some stories aren't meant to be told. He clicked the camera off, then sat in the dark, letting the flames flicker in the silence. In the distance, somewhere deep beyond the reeds, a lion roared, not in fear, not in rage, but in declaration. Elias smiled. He didn't need a response, because sometimes the wild doesn't need to speak to be heard. The second time Elias returned to Botswana, it was quiet. There were no camera crews, no producers, no journalists trailing behind him. He didn't bring a drone this time or a pitch deck for a new wildlife series. He didn't tell his agent or post a single word on his usually active social channels. He simply filed for a short-term filming permit, standard, minimal, and booked a one-way ticket. The immigration officer at Maun Airport barely looked up from the stamp as he passed Elias's passport back. Just another foreigner with too much gear and not enough sense. But Elias had no illusions about adventure this time. He wasn't here for spectacle. He was here for something he couldn't explain to anyone back home. Not in words, not in clips, not even in the carefully polished narratives of nature documentaries. He was here because of what he hadn't filmed, and because of who might still remember him. He took a bush taxi north, then switched to a motorboat, rented from a local guide who didn't ask many questions. By late afternoon, he was winding back into the familiar arms of the Okavango Delta, the water glinting like glass beneath a soft breeze. The reeds rose taller than he remembered, and the birds called in a language he hadn't heard in months, but instantly understood again. Elias guided the boat to the same clearing where it had all happened. He found it almost unchanged. The same crooked tree leaned over the shallows. The same game trails were pressed into the mud. Even the air smelled the same, green, thick with earth and old sunlight. He set up camp just beyond the tree line. Nothing elaborate, a tent, a cot, a cooler stocked with essentials. No sat phone this time, no signal boosters. Just one weatherproof camera and a notebook. He didn't plan to film, but he brought the lens anyway. On his third day back, it happened. Just past dawn, as he stirred instant coffee with a cracked wooden spoon, he heard the reeds whisper. Then a shape emerged. A lion, the same male. It had to be. The thick mane, now threaded with more gray than before, moved with the wind. His body was leaner, perhaps older, but still powerful, still regal in that quiet, untouchable way that only wild things can be. Elias didn't move. He watched. And the lion watched him. They stood like that for nearly a minute. No roars, no warning growls, just presence. Then the lion turned his head slightly, and another shape appeared behind him. The lioness. She was walking, slowly, carefully. Her gait was uneven, favoring her left side. But she was alive. The scarring around her neck was visible, a jagged pale ring beneath the golden fur. She stepped beside the male and looked directly at Elias, and then, impossibly, she sat. Not a crouch, not a readiness to pounce, a full, deliberate sit, like a dog waiting patiently. The male followed. They both sat there, side by side, unmoving. Elias's hands trembled as he reached for his camera. Not to record, just to feel something familiar in his grip. He didn't raise it. He didn't want to break whatever was happening. After several minutes, the lion stood and turned, and before they disappeared into the reeds, the male did something that stopped Elias cold. He glanced back, not once, but twice. A deliberate pause, as if to say, "Come." Elias followed, not closely. He walked slowly, steps soft in the mud, heart pounding. The lions didn't lead him far, just beyond the clearing, down a narrow game trail shaded by acacia. There, in a small dip in the land, was a kill, fresh. A bush buck, throat torn cleanly, but otherwise untouched. No flies, no scavenger tracks. Elias knelt beside it, careful not to disturb the soil. The lions watched from a distance, their bodies relaxed but alert. He looked at the kill, then back at them. It was a message, not a warning, a gift, or perhaps a request. Elias stood slowly. He didn't take the meat, but he nodded, just once, and the lions turned and disappeared. Back at camp, Elias wrote furiously, everything he could remember, every detail, the pacing, the distance, the behavior, the eyes. He knew what it would sound like. Lions don't remember people. Lions don't offer gifts. But it had happened. And for the second time in his life, he had no footage to prove it. That night, as the fire crackled low, Elias sat staring into the flames. Somewhere nearby, a hyena whooped, the sound distant but clear. The stars above him were sharp and endless. He thought about the rules, about the line between science and storytelling, about how the best wildlife footage always claimed to be non-invasive, natural, untouched. But what happened when nature wasn't untouched? What happened when it reached back? He took out his old notebook, the one he hadn't opened since Montana. On a blank page he wrote, "They brought me food." Then beneath it, not because they needed to, because they remembered. The next morning he woke to find tracks around his tent. Paw prints, large, fresh, but no sign of threat, no claw marks, no overturned gear, just prints, as if they'd come to check on him. Elias spent the next week in that clearing. He didn't track the lions. He didn't interfere. He waited, and every 2 or 3 days they appeared. Never closer than necessary, never lingering, but always watching, always returning. On the 7th day, he saw the cub, small, wobbly, curled behind the lioness's legs like a shadow. Elias's breath caught in his throat. A new life? He didn't write it down, didn't record it, just watched. Because some stories he was beginning to understand didn't belong to people. They belonged to the wild, to the ones who couldn't speak but still found ways to say, "We know you, we remember, and we are not done with you yet." On the 8th day, the lions did not return. Elias waited just as he had every morning since that first reappearance. He brewed his bitter coffee, scanned the tree line with patient eyes, kept the fire low so as not to draw unwanted attention. He wrote in his notebook when the air was still, and when it wasn't, he simply watched the reeds sway in the wind and tried to believe that silence didn't mean goodbye. But it did feel different now. The ground around the camp was undisturbed. No paw prints, no broken branches. No distant roars carried through the early light. The bush had gone back to its usual rhythm. Birds chased insects across the canopy. Small antelope dipped their heads in the shallows to drink. Crocodiles slid silently through the water without care. Nothing in the landscape suggested anything remarkable had happened here. But Elias knew better. He packed his things slowly. Not because he was finished, but because he understood something had changed. He'd been allowed to witness something, accepted, if only briefly, into a moment that wasn't his to keep. He loaded the gear into the skiff and turned back toward the camp one last time. The same crooked tree stood by the water, unmoved. The fire pit had cooled to ash. No sign remained, just memory. Back in Maun, the heat struck him differently. It was thicker, more aggressive. Elias checked into a small guest house and laid low. He didn't reach out to anyone, didn't share a word. He knew the weight of this would only grow heavier if he tried to explain it. But that night, a storm moved through. Thunder rolling low across the horizon, lightning flashing in sharp white cracks above the desert. The rain didn't come, only the promise of it. He stood beneath the awning outside his room and watched the clouds. The lioness had been walking slower than the others, favoring one side. It hadn't seemed urgent at the time, just a natural after-effect of her injury. The scar on her neck was deep, pale against the rich gold of her coat, but she was alive, walking, alert. Still, something had been in her eyes. Not pain, not fear, but effort. He couldn't shake the image. The next morning, Elias did something he hadn't done in years. He reached out to a ranger. Not a high-level director, not a press contact, but a field ranger he'd worked with on a short project nearly a decade ago. A woman named Thabiso, who now worked on and off with a small wildlife clinic near the Delta. He didn't mention the python, or the gift, or the cub. He simply asked if she'd seen signs of lion injuries in the area north of Okavango Sector 3. Specifically, a female with scarring and an altered gait. Thabiso responded a few hours later. No recent reports, no sightings of an injured female, no GPS collars on that pride, wild and untagged, which meant there was no way to know for sure. Unless... Elias considered it. Then he asked the question he hadn't dared. She'd ask until now. What would it take, he typed, to bring a vet in, just to observe from a distance? No contact, no interference. Thabiso didn't answer right away, but 2 days later she called. "You saw something, didn't you?" she said softly, voice steady through the static. Elias didn't speak at first. Then, "She's not well." "How bad?" "She's walking, but wrong." Thabiso sighed. "You're not asking for footage. You're asking for help." "Yes?" "You know what happens if anyone finds out you intervened." "I do." There was a long pause. Then, "I'll talk to Dr. Relibohil. She owes me a favor." And just like that, the silence broke. 3 days later, Elias was on a bush plane heading back into the interior. He traveled light, only one camera this time, and even that felt excessive. Thabiso met him at the airstrip, her jeep coated in dust, her uniform sleeves rolled high in the late morning heat. "You look older," she said with a smirk. Elias smiled. "I feel older." They drove in silence for a while, through mopane forests, across cracked salt flats, then into the soft grassland that wrapped around the delta's edge. Elias knew this terrain by heart now. Every bend in the river, every call of the fish-eagle overhead. But with Thabiso beside him, it felt different. The vet, Dr. Relibohil, was already waiting at the observation point. A quiet man in his 50s, he wore mirrored sunglasses and a sun-faded hat pulled low. His manner was clinical, calm. When Elias greeted him, the doctor simply nodded. "She's part of the Machewa pride," he said, opening a worn notebook. "No collars, no tagging. We know them only by patterns." "She's the one with the scar," Elias replied. "Left side of the neck, walks with a favor." Dr. Relibohil nodded again. "We saw her 2 months ago, healthy, had cubs then." "She still has one," Elias said. The doctor looked at him. "How do you know that?" Elias hesitated. "I just do." They set up camp near a shallow rise, far enough to stay out of range, close enough to observe with scopes. For 2 days there was nothing, just the usual. Warthogs grazing, baboons shrieking in the late light, the distant thunder of wildebeest moving upriver. But on the 3rd morning the pride emerged. 5 adults. And the lioness. She walked slowly, just as before. The limp more pronounced now. The cub trotted beside her, awkward and curious. Dr. Relibohil adjusted his scope. Elias didn't need a scope. He knew her. The doctor made a low sound in his throat. "There's inflammation," he said. "Left hip. Possible infection." "Can you treat it?" Elias asked. "Only with sedation." "I can get closer." The doctor glanced at him. "You don't have a license." "You don't need me to have one. You need someone she doesn't run from." Thabiso turned her head. She'd figured it out long before either of them had said it out loud. "They remember him," she said quietly. The doctor folded his hands. "That's not how lions work." But the next morning they all saw it happen. The pride appeared again, this time closer. Elias stood beside the jeep. The lioness saw him. She didn't run. She didn't even flinch. She simply sat down, panting softly, her cub pressing against her side. And from that distance, Elias could see it, just below her ribs. A red line, raw, inflamed. The doctor cursed under his breath. "If we wait, it goes septic. She won't last a week." "We do it now," Elias said. "Too risky. If the pride reacts—" "They won't." And he was right. They sedated her with a dart from a custom rig mounted to the roof. The lions stirred but didn't charge. The male paced, tail flicking, but stayed within the line of reeds. Elias crouched beside the lioness as the vet worked. The wound was deeper than they'd thought, likely torn open during a hunt. The doctor cleaned it, applied antibiotics, and administered the reversal agent. All told, it took 16 minutes. Then they left. No goodbyes, no contact, just distance. And when Elias turned back, the male lion was standing in the trail behind them, his eyes steady. The next morning, the kill was there again. A young reed buck laid clean on the edge of the camp. Elias didn't touch it. He just watched it until the sun came up. And in the stillness of that golden morning, he whispered something he hadn't dared speak until now. "You saved her once, and this time, I got to return the favor." Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat outside his tent, knees pulled to his chest, watching the edge of the clearing where the kill had been placed. The reed buck lay just as it had been before, positioned deliberately, not hidden or torn apart. The body was whole, undisturbed. There was no blood trail, no drag marks. It was as if it had been offered. The rising moon lit the animal's pale coat in soft silver, and beyond it the delta hummed with life. Frogs clicked, crickets rasped. Somewhere in the far dark a hyena whooped once, then fell silent again. But closer to camp there was no sound, no movement, only stillness. The kind that said something had passed through and left something behind. At dawn, the vet packed up first. Dr. Relebohile moved quietly, methodically, as he always did. His canvas bag was half full of instruments, the other half of field notes he refused to digitize. Thabiso rolled up the tent flaps, glancing at Elias occasionally, but saying nothing. They were giving him space. Elias appreciated it. They all had seen the pride behave in a way that challenged every rule of predator behavior. And not just once. The lions had allowed humans within darting range of an injured female. They had remained calm during treatment, and then they had returned to the site that same night to leave a kill. It wasn't just survival. It wasn't instinct. It was memory, and Elias knew it. He waited until the others were out of sight before walking toward the reed buck. Flies had begun to gather at the edges of the wound. A vulture circled above, cautious and far off, but nothing had touched the body, not even scavengers. He knelt beside it, letting the sun warm the back of his neck. The kill was fresh. The lion had eaten nothing. Elias reached out and brushed his hand along the animal's flank. The skin was cool now, but not stiff. The neck had been broken cleanly. No sign of a struggle. He stood and backed away. And when he returned to camp, he wrote only one line in his notebook. "The second gift is always heavier than the first." They left that afternoon. The jeep hummed along dry trails as the dust kicked high behind them. Thabiso drove, her hands steady on the wheel, eyes always scanning. Dr. Relebohile slept in the back seat, his hat tilted over his eyes. Elias stared out the passenger window. The sky had begun to dim. A storm was brewing in the distance, the clouds tall and dark with weight, but the heat still pressed down from above like a held breath. "Do you think they'll do it again?" Thabiso asked suddenly. He turned. "Do what?" "Bring you another kill." Elias shook his head. "I don't know." She didn't respond, but he could tell she was thinking about it too. At the station, Relebohile filed his report in silence. He listed the injury, the treatment, the sedation time, the dosage, the pride's distance during the procedure. He made no mention of the EO, kill, no mention of Elias. That night, Elias returned to the same guest house as before. Room number 6, same fan rattling in the ceiling, same weak light bulb flickering in the corner. But he felt different. He sat on the edge of the bed, notebook open in his lap, and tried to find the words to describe what had changed. They weren't behaviors anymore. They were choices. The lions were choosing to engage, to acknowledge, to respond. And that was something science didn't have a file for. His phone buzzed once on the nightstand. A message. Unknown number. 2 words. Thank you. No signature, no context, just those words. He stared at the screen, waiting for more. Nothing came. He didn't sleep. In the morning, he booked another permit, another 2 weeks. He told no one. When he returned to the clearing, the camp was as he left it. The fire pit still blackened, the grass still bent, no fresh prints. But that afternoon he found the third gift. A young warthog laid where the others had been. Its legs were tucked beneath it. Its eyes were closed. It looked like it had been placed there, not hunted. Elias stood over it, unable to move. A camera could never explain this. A script could never sell this. It wasn't content, it was communion. He buried the warthog just beyond the trail, not out of sentiment, out of respect. Then he sat by the grave until the sun fell. That night the pride came closer. He heard them first. Low grunts, pads on dirt, soft, heavy breath. When he looked up, they were there. 5 lions. The female stood in front this time, her cub pressed against her legs. Her body was thinner now, healing but slower than the rest. Elias remained still. The male lion stepped forward just a few feet. Not threatening, just present. And then he did it again. The nod. One motion. Slow. Deliberate. And in that moment, Elias understood something that rewrote everything he knew. This wasn't about territory or survival. It was about trust and recognition. The lions had not just allowed him to help, they had allowed him to stay. Later, when he tried to write about it, the words failed him. He scribbled phrases: wild empathy, predator memory, cross-species alliance. None of it fit. Eventually, he closed the notebook and put it away. And for the rest of that night, he simply sat by the fire and listened. Not to the lions, to the quiet, to the peace of being seen, not as threat, not as prey, but as something else entirely. When morning came, the pride was gone, but the trails still held their prints, and Elias, for the first time, felt something like belonging. Elias didn't know how long he sat at the edge of the trail, watching the paw prints slowly vanish beneath drifting wind and scattered leaves. The prints weren't fresh, at least not all of them. Some were already blurring with time, with dust, with the soft erasure of nature. But a few remained sharp, heavy, clear, pressed deep into the dirt as if left for him. They had been there. He hadn't imagined it. Even now, as the fire died down and the light turned the reeds to silhouettes, Elias could still feel the warmth of their presence. It lingered like smoke, faint but impossible to forget. He rose slowly, muscles stiff, body tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Back at camp, he poured the last of his water into a tin pot and placed it over the fading coals. The hiss of heat meeting metal felt grounding, familiar. When the tea was ready, he sipped it in silence, eyes drifting toward the tree line where the lions had stood. They had come so close, and still. And they had not touched him, not once. No aggression, no posturing, no tests of dominance, only acknowledgement. The cub had looked at him that time, really looked at him, wide-eyed and still learning the rules of the world. Elias had seen curiosity there, not fear. He wrote about it in his notebook, then closed the cover. There was nothing left to say. The next morning he woke to a rustle outside his tent. He moved quietly, carefully, easing open the flap and peering into the early light. A shape stood in the grass, but it wasn't a lion. It was a man. Khaki shirt, dust-covered boots, a rifle slung across his back. The stranger raised a hand in greeting. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. His accent was local, but his tone was practiced. "Thought this area was clear?" Elias stepped out, heart still racing. "I have a permit." "Not questioning that," the man said, smiling. "Just surprised to see anyone this far out alone." The man introduced himself as Daniel, a freelance guide working with a small private lodge on the eastern edge of the delta. He said his clients had heard lions in the night and asked him to scout ahead. Elias said little in return. He didn't explain why he was here, didn't explain what he'd seen, but Daniel wasn't in a hurry to leave. "You know," the man said after a moment, "they say lions can't tell one person from another. To them, we're just shapes, smells, nothing more." Elias didn't answer. Daniel continued. "But I've seen strange things. Lions avoiding one jeep but not another, reacting to one voice but not the rest. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?" Elias watched him carefully. "Maybe they remember more than we think." Daniel tilted his head. "You a filmmaker?" "Was." "Still got the gear?" "Some." "Well," Daniel shrugged, "if you're not using it, that's a shame. There's always a market for lion footage, especially now. Real wild stuff. Tourists love it. Sponsors love it more." Elias didn't reply. Daniel gave a final nod. "If you change your mind, we're camped about 10 kilometers south. Name's on the license plate. Safe travels." Then he vanished into the grass. Elias stood still for a long time. The world around him returned to its usual rhythm. Birds calling, wind in the reeds, the hum of insects rising with the sun. But something inside him had shifted. He spent the rest of the day moving along the old trails, camera bag slung over one shoulder, notebook tucked beneath his arm. He didn't track the lions. He didn't call to them. But he stayed open, listening. By afternoon, he reached the clearing near the old python site. It looked different now, less haunted, less scarred. He set the camera down but didn't turn it on. Instead, he sat against the same crooked tree and waited. The hours passed. The light changed. And then, as the first stars appeared, they came. All 5. The lioness moved slower now, but not from pain, from care. She had 2 cubs with her, twins maybe, small but sturdy, golden like their mother, full of nervous energy. They stayed close, ears flicking, eyes wide. The male led them into the clearing, stopping a few meters from Elias. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. He just looked at him, then lowered his head. It wasn't a bow. It was something else, something deeper. Elias felt it like a drumbeat in his chest. The lion remembered. Not just him, not just the rescue, but everything that had come after. The silence, the gifts, the trust. It was all there in that single deliberate gesture. The cubs moved forward, testing the edge of their safety. One pawed the earth, mimicking its father. The other stayed pressed to its mother's leg. Elias didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched, heart steady, breath quiet. And in that moment, he knew the truth. They had accepted him, not as one of their own, but as something not entirely separate. He would never be a lion, but he would never be just a man again either. When the pride turned to leave, the male paused once more. A final glance, a final connection. Then they were gone. Back into the grass, into the dark, into the endless pulse of the wild. Elias sat there long after, the camera still off, the notebook untouched, and for the first time in years he felt no need to prove what he'd seen, because he had felt it. and they had felt it, and some truths were too sacred to translate. The early light poured slowly across the surface of the delta, casting long shadows on the still water. Elias stood barefoot on the bank beside his boat, feeling the dew soak into the hem of his pants. His breath steamed in the crisp air, and in his chest something old and quiet stirred. Exactly 1 year had passed since the moment that changed everything. 1 year since the breathless struggle, the impossible rescue, the lion's eyes meeting his in that moment of unspoken alignment. He had not returned to the clearing until now. For 12 months he'd carried it within him, a weight, yes, but not a burden, a kind of memory that asked for silence instead of explanation. And now he was back. The delta had changed with the season. The grass was higher, thicker, the familiar game trails were overgrown or rerouted, as they always were. But the bend in the river was still there, marked by the leaning fig tree, its roots knotted into the muddy bank like the grip of an old hand, refusing to let go. He tied the boat quietly and climbed ashore with just his pack, camera slung over one shoulder, not to record, just to carry, like an old companion. The breeze moved through the reeds in slow waves, and the air buzzed with insects already awake. Elias made camp without ceremony. No fire this time, no tent, only a tarp stretched low to the ground and a roll of canvas to sleep on. He wasn't here for comfort. He was here for remembrance. By midday, he'd walked the perimeter of the clearing 3 times, scanning the brush, watching the wind shift patterns in the tall grass. He found no tracks, no movement, but still the feeling lingered, like being watched not with suspicion, but with familiarity. He spent the afternoon writing. In the back pages of his notebook, he scribbled thoughts he hadn't dared say aloud, thoughts about the way the lion had looked at him, about the way the lioness had risen after her collapse, about the cubs born in the aftermath of survival. He wrote something else, too, a line he crossed out twice and finally let remain. Maybe trust isn't a myth after all. Just before dusk, he heard it. A sound not of footsteps, but of presence. A hush that settled unnaturally in the reeds. A pause in the insects. A vibration beneath his boots. He stood slowly, heart steady now, no panic, only anticipation. And then the male lion stepped forward. Time had weathered him, but not dulled him. His mane was fuller, streaked with gray, like the bark of the fig tree. His body carried new scars. His gait was measured, deliberate. Behind him came the lioness, limping slightly, as always, but walking with her head high. 2 young lions trailed them, larger now, confident in the way of those just beginning to realize their strength. They stood in a semicircle across from Elias. No movement, no sound. He didn't reach for the camera, didn't speak. He only dropped to one knee, hands resting loosely on his thighs, and waited. The lion watched him. A full minute passed. Then the lioness stepped forward, 3 paces only, and sat. Her eyes met Elias's. And she blinked. Slow, intentional, like closing a door on the past and opening it again for something new. One of the young lions looked confused, shifting its weight, unsure of what this moment was meant to be. The other simply sat, mirroring its mother. Then the male lion moved. Not forward. Not away. He lowered his body to the ground, paws tucked beneath his chest. He rested his head on his front legs, eyes still fixed on Elias. Elias whispered, the words catching in his throat. "I see you, old friend." He didn't expect a response, but he got one. The lion blinked. Then, without sound or warning, he gave a slow, subtle dip of the head. Not submission, recognition. The light faded fast. The shadows grew long. The pride sat with him as the night gathered, and for a time that felt like a breath held too long, nothing moved. Then the lioness stood. The young lions followed. They turned into the grass one by one, slipping into the darkness like smoke. Only the male remained. He rose slowly, turned his head once more, and vanished. Elias sat for a long time. Then, when he stood, he noticed something at the edge of the clearing. A carcass, fresh, a young reed buck, no blood, no wounds beyond a clean break in the neck, placed carefully in the grass near his shelter, not hidden, not half-eaten. An offering. He approached slowly, touched nothing, and crouched beside it. The air was still. The insects had returned. Above him the sky unfolded into stars. He whispered again. This wasn't for survival. He paused. It was for memory? And maybe that's what it had always been. They remembered. They had returned not just because of what happened 1 year ago, but because something had changed in the space between. Not in them, in him. He left the offering untouched. At dawn, he packed his bag and placed the notebook on the stone where the lion had once stood. The final page bore no words, just a single line, sketched in pencil. The curve of a lion's eye. He didn't take the camera with him, didn't take the memory card from the camera either. He left it all there, under the tarp, as the morning light washed over the clearing. When he reached the boat, he paused and looked back one last time. The reeds swayed. The wind moved. And somewhere deep beyond the grass, a roar rose, not violent, not loud, just steady. It was not a roar of warning, it was a call. Not farewell, but until next time.